Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report. In this programme today, we'll be celebrating the work of Magen David Adom, as last year, 2020, they celebrated their 90th anniversary. And what a year 2020 was. Warm welcome to the programme, and my two guests are from North London, and they're representing the excellent work being done by Magen David Adom in saving lives in Israel. So I'm joined by Daniel Berger, who's the Chief Executive of Magen David Adom, and our good friend Stephen Jaffe, who's loved by our viewers, is a consultant to the work of MDA. So, gentlemen, welcome to the programme. Firstly, I'll start off with you, Daniel, because as we look back at 2020, I've got to say that it's been an incredible year, but also a very special year for MDA, as it's your 90th anniversary as an organisation. And for that, you had to deal with COVID-19, which is extremely difficult. So can you give us an overview of what kind of year 2020 has been for MDA?
Well, hello. Pleasure to be back. Wow, how long have we got to answer that question?
55 minutes, yeah.
What a year. What a year. I think it's been a huge learning curve for everyone. I was last in Israel in March, and I don't think any of us, particularly MDA also, foresaw the volume and the amount of work that they would be undertaking in terms of dealing with COVID and the response in Israel. And I suppose I look back with immense pride on how our colleagues both across the Med in Israel have handled it, and also my team here in the UK. We all know what a bizarre year we've been through, and so both clinically in Israel and from a fundraising perspective here, it's been a steep learning curve.
And Stephen, it's good to see that you're now a consultant to Magen David Adom. How did you get involved with MDA, and what does Israel's National Emergency Service mean to you?
Well, I think Magen David Adom, to me, it sums up, I think, the very best of Israel, and it's a huge privilege to be working for them here in the UK and supporting the work that they do in Israel. Israel isn't just the state for the Jewish people. It's not just another nation state in the world. It's got principles and ideals underlying it, and I think Magen David Adom really kind of epitomizes that. It is a huge volunteer organization. Over 20,000 Israelis volunteer for Magen David Adom right across Israeli society, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Druze. So it is an amazing organization, and saving lives is something which I think is so central to our traditions, both as Jews and Christians. It's doing fantastic work, so I think it sums up the very best of Israel.
Dan, you've got a real star here in Stevenson. Great that he's now part of the MDA setup. Now, 2020 was the 90th anniversary. I think because of COVID, we should have done a programme earlier to mark this historical occasion. And that the most amazing thing is that Magen David Adom predates the modern state of Israel. Can you tell us something about the history and the origin of how MDA started? Because according to my notes here, the British High Commissioner of the Mandate of Palestine approved the registration of the Association for Rapid Assistance, which then later became MDA.
Yeah, absolutely. You said it in a nutshell. Back in 1930, what became Magen David Adom was established, and so a 90-year-old emergency saving organisation, the National Emergency Service of Israel, was effectively born. And of course, fast forward 90 years to a very, very different organisation that it is today. And I think the other key landmark date was in 1950, when it was mandated by the Knesset to become that National Medical Emergency Service, and continues to today.
Excellent. So let's have a look at this superb video that looks back at the last 90 years of the work of Magen David Adom.
עושים בזאת על הקמת מדינה יהודית בארץ ישראל.
And that gives a great overview of the work of MDA over the past 90 years. Stephen, it's extraordinary to think that MDA has been existent for 90 years, since 1930, predates the modern state of Israel by 18 years. What impact has MDA had on Israel's development throughout the decades?
I think it's central. Actually, as I've said, it kind of epitomizes a certain aspect of what makes Israel distinctive and different. It's a volunteer organization, and its reach is right across Israeli society. We in the UK would tend to think of a medical emergency service like the ambulance service as being professionals, you know, a part of society, but not the way Magen Adom kind of extends right across society. So you would have volunteers from all walks of life, secular, religious, from right across the country taking part. So you have a national medical emergency service which is intrinsic to that society. on top of all of that, Simon, Magen David Adom works globally as a part of the International Red Cross. So it's there representing Israel, the very best of Israel, wherever there is humanitarian need. And that can be in countries as far away as Guatemala or Haiti, or even a country like Indonesia, which has no diplomatic relations with Israel. But it's often the first emergency service to land wherever there has been a disaster. And that, I think, is it shows Israel at its very best as a force for good in the world today.
Absolutely. And Daniel, you mentioned the fact that in 1950 was a special year in which MDA was incorporated into Israeli law and became the national emergency service on behalf of Israel. What is it about the Israelis that they're very, very, they consider MDA almost a kind of sacred institution of the state in Israel? And why do Israel see MDA in that light?
Well, I think it is sacred because here's an organization that's absolute raison d'etre is about saving lives, no questions asked. As Stephen says, that could be in countries where there's no diplomatic ties, but closer to home and domestically, it doesn't draw any conclusions. It doesn't make any assumptions. It treats everybody no matter what. And so to have an organization where we're saying this isn't a Jewish ambulance service, this is an emergency service for the state of Israel, and is a total cross-representation of society, and served by a cross-representation of society is what makes it that institution. And I'll just add, it's such an institution that year in, year out, it's voted the second most trusted brand in Israel, only behind the IDF.
Wow. That's quite something. And Stephen, when it comes down to the work here in the UK, we really appreciate the incredible work being carried out by the NHS, particularly in this dreadful year that 2020 has been. We're dealing with the global pandemic, COVID-19. But the thing I think what marks MDA out is that here's an organisation that's had to respond to 5 major wars in Israel's 72-year history, had to deal with a number of different terrorist incidences, dealing with rocket and missile attacks, as well as suicide bombings. What do you think that other national ambulance services can learn from MDA's experience of handling a multitude of different emergencies?
Well, I think it's really important to say, Simon, that Magen David Adom is training other emergency services right across the world, including in the Arab world as well. That might sound strange, but they realise that Magen David Adom are absolute world leaders when it comes to issues around emergency response to, as you've said, it could be a terrorist incident, getting your first responders there within minutes is vital. Being able to weigh up the scene, who needs the help most. These are skills that, unfortunately, in very adverse conditions, sometimes Magen David Adom have picked up, and they are training, obviously, their own people, but other services as well. And there is a lot to learn from Magen David Adom. And
Daniel, we know that Israel, back in March of 2020, was one of the first countries to go into national lockdown. How has MDA contributed to the fight against COVID-19 in Israel?
So I saw this firsthand right at the beginning. I was in Israel, I was just checking the diary earlier, actually, and saying what a year it was until the beginning of March. I was in Israel the first week of March when this happened. They locked down all of Europe, with the exception of the UK, and then they also kept the US open. And we all thought they were nuts. I mean, the country's gone completely mad, shutting down all of its borders. And at that point, going into the dispatch centre, which we just saw on that previous film, the average calls was shooting up at that point from 5,500 a day to 40,000 calls a day. And then fast forward another few weeks and it topped out at over 200,000 calls a day, so 40 times its daily average. So MDA was responding immediately by handling the 101 call centre, so all of the calls in were handling COVID as well. And then they were also handling all of the pre-hospitalisation testing. So as of the time of now speaking, over 3 million tests have been carried out by, COVID tests have been carried out by MDA.
Incredible. So let's have a look now at how MDA responded to the crisis in Israel, COVID-19.
Magen Adom, the Israeli national EMS organization, is fighting the coronavirus spread using advanced means. Magen Adom has been active for more than 90 years and is a member of the IFRC and is working collaboratively with the ICRC, providing humanitarian assistance in Israel and all over the world. Since the beginning of the global coronavirus outbreak, MDA has carefully monitored the trail of infection and has taken early preparation measures. The organization has increased the number of field responders, phlebotomists, and emergency medical vehicles, enlisted IDF reservists, members of the MDA Reserve Unit, trained many professional call takers for immediate one-on-one over-the-phone response, recruited volunteers to enlarge its force, trained its personnel in the use of personal protective gear, and swab testing. 82,000 emergency calls were answered a day by the call takers, EMTs, and paramedics at the National Operations Center, and many Israelis were approved to be swab tested for the virus. Calls were responded to by more than 500 call takers. MDA uses advanced, innovative technological means in order to carefully manage the registry of thousands of callers and to maintain a chain of treatment that includes the Health Ministry's district physician and the Health Ministry itself, while utilizing a state-of-the-art command and control system developed by the organization, as well as an application that enables sending medical information and medical orders. In order to manage the growing number of patients, MDA opened drive-in test sites that can perform swab tests on thousands of people a day in a quick process that takes about 4 minutes. The first drive-in test site is operating in Tel Aviv, with 6 lanes manned by security guards, paramedics, and EMTs, who take thousands of swab tests a day. Additional drive-in test sites have been activated in major cities across Israel, and MDA team members are collecting swab samples from tens of thousands of Israelis each day. MDA and the Health Ministry are doing their utmost to provide rapid diagnostic services to patients in order to control the spread of the virus among the 9 million Israeli civilians and soldiers.
And that gives us some idea of how MDA responded to the challenge of COVID-19 in Israel. Stephen, in terms of kind of operations, what did MDA put in place? Because I know they work very closely with the IDF to help with the track and trace and to help contain the virus in Israel. But how vital do you think the work of MDA was in trying to confront the global pandemic?
Well, it was a frontline force, Simon, and still is. As Daniel was saying, everything from responding to inquiries and responding to people phoning in, to doing the testing, one of the most significant organizations testing Israelis, and to obviously transferring patients to hospital. And all of that required innovation. It required thinking outside the box because of the tremendous increase in demand in their services. So they have been front and center in Israel's response, and this has been recognized right across. I saw that recently there were politicians visiting Magen Adom's center to give thanks, and that was everyone from the right of Israeli politics through to the left and the Arab parties as well. They all recognized that Magen Adom had a fundamental role in seeing the country through this horrendous crisis.
And Daniel, can you share with us the big project that MDA are doing, and that's the building of a national blood centre that has to be built underground because of potential rocket and missile attacks that could damage Israel's vital blood supplies. Can you share with us the progress of how this huge project is undertaking?
Yeah, it's hugely exciting now. I know we've talked about this in the past. The project has been in conversation for over 12 years. They wanted to dig this enormous hole in the ground. And all of a sudden, it's nearly there. It's so exciting to know that by next spring, the Bernie Marcus National Blood Centre will be built. It's near completion. And what's really exciting is Bernie Marcus, who very generously gave $25 million to name the building, has just put a further $10 million of match funding in to ensure that the final 20 million is met. So we, as the diaspora out there now, collectively raising $10 million to complete this project. And thanks to the Marcus family, that will be matched, and that will then be the end to the project.
And we're showing a video here showing some of the kind of technical equipment being built. Do you want to talk us through this video that our viewers are seeing?
So this is underground in the basement. So here we're up to 17 metres below ground. The capsule here has been built to Ministry of Defence specifications. In fact, the plans are so secret, a lot of builders lost the tender because they didn't pass the security clearance to build it. And what we're seeing here is the most protected area of the whole building, where there will be some generators and a blood inventory stored. So if the worst happens, the core of the building would be protected. It's amazing. So we're still 17 meters underground at this point with the generators. This is Moshe Noyevich who's opening it up. This is the guy that's the lead engineer on the project. This is his baby, and he is a superstar at ensuring that this has been built effectively on time. And it's really remarkable. And down here is all the filtration to make sure there's clean air, airlocks, the freezers here. So this is for the plasma. So the blood separates into 3 units, and this is where they'll be storing the plasma. So again, all protected, all underground, directly off the laboratories which are underground. I think what's also amazing is here. So now we can see we're on the 2nd level underground. So it's like a mezzanine level. So there's the filtration systems.
Oh, very good. I like the way they named that after the Irish band U2 as well. I was impressed with that. So maybe you get some donations from Bono as well.
You never know.
Stephen, we saw in that video that incredible blood centre that's being built. So can you explain to our viewers how strategic and how important this new national blood centre is, considering that there is no real other country in the Western world that faces the same kind of rocket and missile threat that Israel does, whether it's from Hezbollah in the north in southern Lebanon or from Hamas in the south?
Well, as Daniel said, it's underground and deep underground to withstand the possibility of a direct missile attack. And this is unfortunately a reality for Israel. It needs to ensure that. I mean, just think about it, the importance of having a blood centre in times of war, in times of crisis. It is so significant. If you were, God forbid, to have a direct hit on your blood centre and not being able to operate on casualties, whether they were military or civilian, would be disastrous. So this has a huge strategic importance for Israel, and it's a huge responsibility of Magen David Adom to be the lead organisation in collecting blood. Over, I think, 98% of all blood that's collected in Israel is through Magen David Adom, and to be processing it for use, both in terms of everyday needs of the medical system, but also there for times of emergency, which could be anything from earthquakes, because I think we sometimes forget that Israel isn't on 1 earthquake fault line, it's on 2. So they have to prepare for that as well. So it is amazing the steps that Israel has had to take to ensure that this is a secure and protected building.
And Dan, you can also share with us how 2020's had a big impact on the work of MDA here in the UK, particularly with COVID-19. As you said, that you haven't been to Israel since March of 2020. Probably very few people have been either. So how do you raise awareness of the work of MDA and keep the finances and raise the money for the finances needed for this organisation in these very difficult situations that we've all found ourselves in this year?
It's an interesting one. We've been very fortunate that our donors have still been very generous. In fact, actually, our income, I don't want to tempt fate before year end, but which is our financial year end, we're about 4 or 5% up on last year income, which is amazing. I think this year has been, I used the word learning curve before, it's been a learning curve for us, and it's been an enormous game changer because, as you well know, we have a lot of in-person events through the year. We meet our donors face to face. People don't want to do Zoom the whole time. They don't want to just do phone calls. But actually, if anything this year we've learned that it is what we have to do. The way of the world has changed. It's forced us to change. And I think if one doesn't adapt, one will fall by the wayside. And as a result, we have looked at our whole fundraising platform and our mechanism for fundraising. And only last week we had our National Life-Saving Day, which brought 2020 to an end. And here we aim to raise £2 million from crowdfunding from some of our major donors, and we smashed that. We raised over 2.3 million. The money is still coming in as we speak, and thanks to the Bernie Marcus matching, so far we've been able to claim $2 million for matching. So it's really been a remarkable year. We've been very fortunate. I think next year is going to be a struggle, and on, so 21 and 22, we're going to see a very different type of fundraising as we come back into the world of vaccines and meeting people. But it's going to be a very different fundraising message, and I think it's going to be a very different landscape before we're going to big events again.
And also, can you share with us as well, you managed to able to attract a lot of kind of celebrity support, including the big fan of MDA, Judge Rinder, and the Israeli actress, is it Gal Gadot?
Gal Gadot.
Who's known for playing, Wonder Woman, that's right. Nearly forgot then for a moment. So with such big kind of celebrities wanting to endorse MDA, what does that say about MDA?
Well, I think it comes back to what we were saying before, that MDA is an institution, and people here don't necessarily appreciate it because we think of it in a fundraising context, it's Israel's ambulance service, but we don't live it and breathe it. We have 999, we have the London Ambulance Service or other ambulance services, but in Israel, it is so ingrained in society that there's not a single Israeli that isn't directly connected some way or another to MDA, either by volunteering or by having to have used the service or know someone that's used the service. I think it's probably near on impossible not to be only one step away from MDA.
And it's been a tough year for the Jewish community, hasn't it? 2020, particularly with COVID. Stephen, can you share with us the impact that COVID-19 has had on the Jewish community in 2020?
As with the rest of the country, Simon, the community has suffered. We've lost some outstanding individuals to COVID. I can think of one or two rabbis, faith leaders, some of our elder statesmen of the community very sadly succumbed to the illness. Beyond that, as a community, like the Christian community, we're very into communal worship. It's a cornerstone of our faith, and yet that has been so badly impacted this year. So it would be no secret to say that both economically and in terms of mental illness, the Jewish community, along with the wider society, has suffered a great deal, which I think makes it even more remarkable when Daniel says that, you know, the donations and the support for the organisation is still coming in, because I think people appreciate that Magen David Adom, those people who love Israel, can see that this is an organisation which is fighting the battle against COVID as a frontline organisation, and they want to support it in whatever way they can, whether it's big donations or small donations, but they want to be part of that battle. So I think Magen David Adom is a focus both for the Jewish community and our Christian friends in terms of fighting back and during this horrible, horrible year.
Absolutely. And Daniel, can you talk through some of the work of Christian friends of Magen David Adom? I always know Barbara Dingle very well, and she does a great work. So how has the work of CFI MDA really had a big impact on helping MDA?
So our Christian friends are really remarkable. They were the ones that set the bar for all of the other international societies of Magen David Adom to come along and set up their own Christian friends. So we are the role model. The Christian friends in the UK are the ones that everyone looks to for advice and support. I know that Barbara is speaking to our counterpart in Ireland about setting up Christian Friends of MDA Ireland now as well. So it's really remarkable, and I'm absolutely thrilled that for me, the best Hanukkah Christmas present we could have is the completion of the Christian Friends Bloodmobile, which is just there now. The £135,000 raised for the latest project, which is really remarkable. It's just, I am always astounded by the generosity of our Christian friends. It fills me with immense pride and warmth, actually, to know that we have so many good friends out there.
Absolutely. And Stephen, you're a big fan in the Christian world, particularly when it comes to Israel as well. So to have Christian friends of Magen and David Adom alongside MDA and working so closely together, what impact can you see that they've had on helping the work of MDA and saving lives in Israel?
Well, it's one of the things that attracted me to Magen David Adom UK is that it's outward facing and that the Christian support is integral. It's part of the MDA family. Barbara Dingle, who has been on the show many times, I know, is on the board of Magen David Adom UK. The Reverend Mark Madeley, who also I'm sure has been on the programme as well. Yeah, so he's a trustee. So they're part and parcel of the Magen David Adom family. And I think that working together of Jews and Christians, what Magen David Adom is, it's a wonderful platform of partnering with Israel, and that goes across the board. It's not in any way denominational. It's for Jews, it's for Christians, it's for anyone who has a love of Israel. It's the perfect model, I think, of our support, showing practical support. I mean, Israelis see on the side of an ambulance, written in Hebrew and in English, this has been funded by Christian friends in the United Kingdom. They can see that that friendship is there and it's real and it's practical and it's helping them and it's standing with them. So I think it is a tremendous vehicle for strengthening that friendship, not just between Israel and the diaspora Jewish community, but those Christian friends as well.
Daniel, we have a lot of our viewers watching who work in the NHS. They're either doctors or nurses. And my own kind of background as well. My wife's a nurse, and so my mother's a former nurse. So I've kind of been around the whole medical profession, I think, all my life. So I know of such important work being done by MDA. What advice have you got for any of our viewers watching that have that medical experience that want to help MDA? Because I know I've been approached personally by a few people saying, love to be able to do some voluntary work for MDA out in Israel.
So that's always a wonderful invitation, and we would welcome any help, any support. People with professional qualifications can speak to MDA, and if they get in touch with us through our website, we can make that connection for them. If people are just going out on a holiday and they would love to go and do an observational shift or two in an ambulance, very easy to set up. It's actually addictive and a wonderful way of seeing the real grassroots organisation, and that's a pleasure. And another project we're starting to work on now is for gap year students. So perhaps for those who are thinking of going into medicine or are going into medicine and would love to go and spend a few weeks in Israel on shifts, we're going to be starting to look at some remote learning here and then taking them out to Israel for a series of shifts. And I think that will be a really exciting, innovative initiative.
Excellent. I know my wife personally wants to do that one.
Anytime.
And Stephen, I suppose we have to also look about how Israel's now meeting new challenges. Recently, there was a drill being carried out in Israel to prepare the Israelis' health professionals together with MDA to prepare for a mass terror attack with a multiple number of casualties. How important is it that Israel carries out these drills and really does prepare for the worst case scenario?
It has to. That's just fact of life in that part of the world. It has all the challenges and demands of any ambulance service anywhere, but on top of that, it has to take into account the worst case scenarios. That's where it is really tested. And as I've said, as we saw with COVID, it was able to innovate because I think that's something the Israelis are very good at, is thinking outside the box and not necessarily doing things just because that's the way it's always been done, but thinking what are the demands of the situation and how can we meet them. So these training sessions and drills are not just important for Magen David Adom because, as I've said, they actually train other national medical emergency services across the world. So what they pick up during these training sessions is something which will be of benefit to other countries as well.
Excellent. So let's have a look at this drill carried out in Israel, preparing themselves for a potential mass terrorist attack with a multiple number of terrorist victims.
אנחנו קיבלנו לפני דקה על מידע על אירוע רב נפגעים. מדובר באוטובוס תיירים, מאות רכב, וגם בנוסף יש נפגעים ילדים.
And sadly, Israel has to prepare themselves for the worst case scenario, living in an extremely difficult neighborhood. Can you talk through what we saw on that video? Because it looked like Israel was preparing themselves for a possible chemical or biological weapons attack, which is sadly one of the worst case scenarios that Israel could possibly face. And so therefore, the Israelis have to be ready, don't they? The Israeli government have to be ready. The emergency services have to be ready. But what role does MDA play in a kind of simulation exercise like we just saw?
Yeah, it's really interesting to see that, because I see the equipment sometimes in the stations and in the ambulances, but I've never actually seen it even in a mass casualty event. So it was really great to see it being used and to understand it. I think, as with anything, we remember the first Gulf War when the chemical attacks were far more of a threat, and in some ways it's sort of quietened down a bit since then, but MDA absolutely has to be ready. You saw it on the blood center video with the advanced filtration systems, and MDA's role here is absolutely crucial. Just like they've done with COVID and just like with any other patients, they're responsible for transporting them to hospital. And you see here in this condition, they have to transport people in the best and most safe way possible, both for the patient and for the crew on board, so they can treat them, but treat them safely.
And Stephen, when we look at Israel, and I think it's a great news that we're seeing less and less terrorist attacks in Israel, certainly since Israel built the security barrier, which has stopped virtually all the suicide bombings that Israel faced over 20 years ago or so. But what is your kind of response of how MDA can teach other nations, such as our own kind of National Health Service, our own ambulance service, to deal with multiple different terrorist instances, whether it's stabbings, which we've seen with ISIS over the last couple of years, or whether it's with shootings, or whether it's just kind of suicide bombings as well. But the one thing our nation doesn't have to deal with, and that is the threat of kind of rocket and missile attacks. So what do you think MDA can teach, you know, the British Ambulance Service when it comes to dealing with a kind of terrorism instance?
Well, sadly, they are kind of world leaders in that. I mean, I grew up in Northern Ireland, as you know, Simon, and what I could see was in terms of things like post-traumatic stress. Now, this may not be Magen David Adom, but the kind of relationship between specialists in Northern Ireland and in Israel, learning from each other about that, the impact of bullet wounds. I mean, sadly, Israel has the expertise, and there is so much that is going on in terms of training. It is amazing, as I've said, that Magen David Adom is a trainer to national medical services in the Arab world, because they know that they are at the top of the game at this kind of thing. So it's often it could be, I guess, quite basic things about when you arrive in a mass casualty scene. How do you triage the people who have been injured? How do you know who are the ones who will benefit most, who needs it most? These are very practical, very significant issues facing any first responder arriving in a horrific scene like that. And Israel, Magen David Adom will have expertise in that, which it certainly can pass on, because sadly, issues regarding terrorism is something that we across the world, including in this country, are also facing. The kind of random nature of it. It could be anything from a pop concert to our inner city. So yes, Magen David Adom will have the skills, the expertise and the training behind them, which they can share and do share with other similar bodies in other countries.
And Daniel, 2020 was an extraordinary year for other reasons, really, namely the Abraham Accords, in which Israel signed an historic peace agreement with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. And at the end of this year, they're talking about now Morocco formalising diplomatic relations with Israel, together with Sudan as well, and these were Israel's former enemies. So we're seeing that the Saudis are also beginning to open up to Israel as well, all the kind of so-called moderate Arab Sunni states. What impact and openings is this giving for MDA to work closely with Israel's newly formed newly formed relationships in the Arab world? Sorry.
I think it's really, really exciting. I know that as a member of the Red Cross back in 2005, it was Dr. Al-Hadid, the president of the Jordanian Red Crescent, who ensured both MDA and the Palestinians' admission to the movement. So right the way from day one, when MDA was admitted to the movement, it was done with the support of the Arab League through Dr. Al-Hadid. And now fast forward to 2020 and 2021, and suddenly we're seeing this relationship normalize with other countries in that region. And so for me, as MDA UK's CEO, I think it's hugely exciting. In fact, we've got our first conversations with the UAE embassy. I'm hoping the Bahraini embassy won't be far behind. And I believe that our supporters here will very much look forward to some Anglo relations with these organizations. And I know that in Israel, certainly through the Red Cross movement, they'll all be looking at Israel in terms of the technology and how MDA can help in those regions as well. So very much looking forward to some great reciprocal dialogue.
And what do you think can come out of the new relationship that Israel have with the United Arab Emirates, knowing that they are, like Israel, kind of very technologically advanced nation? And how do you think the cooperation between the two nations can cooperate in saving lives, both in the United Arab Emirates and Israel as well?
Well, I think what's apparent, Simon, in this relationship is, unlike the peace agreement with Egypt, for example, which was quite cold, yes, it's extremely important for Israel strategically. Unlike that, the United Arab Emirates are very keen to build relationships in trade and tourism, investment bilaterally. So I think Magen David Adom would be, and is, the perfect kind of bridge, because it's such a humanitarian organization. It is literally non-political, because it brings in all sections of Israeli society. And that humanitarian brand is going to be, I think, very important to provide substance to what could otherwise just be perhaps a political alliance. We know that underlying much of this kind of great shift in diplomatic relations is security concerns regarding the Middle East. But I think Magen David Adom can provide content and substance to that, the political and the kind of security aspects of those arrangements. So I'm really excited as well that it could lead to closer engagement with countries which in the past have perhaps looked at Israel admiringly in certain respects, but now we can actually provide a practical relationship with them.
And Daniel, we're down to the last 3.5 minutes of the programme or so. So looking upon the opportunities and the challenges facing MDA in 2021, what are they?
In the UK, I think it's sustaining our level of growth and our success through the last couple of years and teaching new groups about supporting and why the need to support MDA and why MDA needs the support from the diaspora. The attitude of Israel as an evolving nation, armchair Zionism is literally dying off. But here we have a nation and therefore by default an organization in MDA that is absolutely intrinsically part of Israeli society. And it needs the support of the diaspora in order to make it that extraordinary service. We're not just funding the bandages. MDA can operate its own ambulance service, but our challenges are talking to our donors and explaining, and to new donors, and saying this is why it needs the support. And the National Life Saving Day showed us that actually, by taking a different medium and going from a real dinner to a virtual event, we got 30% new viewers watching our show.
Excellent. And also the challenges we have to say is the next generation really to encourage the kind of millennial generation to get on board with the work of the MDA. And I think that's a challenge both in the Christian Zionist community and probably in the Jewish community as well. So how is MDA going to prepare themselves to meet this challenge?
Well, I think it's an exciting time because there are all sorts of opportunities. Daniel's mentioned you can actually go to Israel and spend time with Magen David Adom on kind of hands-on programs where they'll train you on the basics, and then you're in the back of an ambulance. And this would be great for young medical students, young people interested in careers in nursing or medicine. That's a fantastic opportunity. But beyond that, I think it is although it's 90 years old, Simon, it's a fresh organisation. It's innovative. It's doing new things. It's reaching out in unique and new ways. Who can be failed to be impressed by the fact that in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in terms of its COVID testing, they turned to Israel for the expertise in doing that. So this is an organisation that we can all feel enormous pride in terms of its impact across the world. And I think that appeals to people of all generations. And armchair Zionists, yes, indeed, but also people who really want to stand with Israel and show support. It's a fantastic vehicle for that through whatever generation.
Excellent. And probably within 30 seconds, Daniel, how can our viewers get involved in the work of Magen David Adom by saving lives in Israel?
Yeah, great question. So I would say to you, please come donate. Go to the website on the screen now. This is your opportunity to really make a difference. If you feel so compelled to give now, the Bernie Marcus Foundation will double your amounts of money given. And that is all about impact and making a difference. This is MDA's landmark project, and we need your help. We need your support. So please be in touch, and we will be absolutely delighted to speak to you and help any way we can.
Daniel and Stephen, thank you so much for being my guests on today's Middle East Report.
Thank you.
And I just want to thank you for watching this programme today. MDA is a great organisation because they save lives in Israel, whether it's Israelis or whether it's Jewish Israelis, whether it's Christians or Muslims. And this is what makes them a very special organisation. And as Christians, we can be part of that through the work of Christian friends of Magen David Adom, because we know they're making a huge difference in Israel and they're saving lives. And this is why it's so important to support the work of MDA. So I want to thank you for watching today's Middle East Report.
Avinu Malkeinu אני חדש, אני רוצה ממש. אם תרצי, אני אתן לך מנגינה שתנגן לך את הכל. אני אתן לך את הכל וגם השיר.
כשאמא בהנה יפה וצעירה, אז אבא על גבעה בנה לבית. חלפו אביבים חצי מעברה, וטלטלים הפכו צבע בינתיים. אבל על חוף ירדן כמו מאומה לא קרה אותה הדומייה וגם אותה התפאורה. חורשת האקליפטוס, הגשר הסירה, וריח המלוח על המים. חורשת האקליפטוס, הגשר הסירה, וריח המלוח על המים.
אוכילה לאל, אכלה פניו, אשאלה ממנו מענה לשון, אשר בקלה השיר העוזו, הביע רננות ביד מפעלה לאדם מרחי לב ומאשר מענה לשון, השם שפתי תפתח ופי אגיד תהילתך. שנה טובה,
שנה הלכה, שנה באה, אני כפה ירימה. שנה טובה לך בה, שנה טובה לך אמא. שנה טובה, שנה טובה,
שנה טובה לכל עמל, בנר וגם במלך.
שנה טובה ומתוקה לכל ילדה וילד.